All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you for tuning in for another Hope at the End of the Tunnel podcast. I am one of your co hosts, Juanita Woodson. And of course, I'm joined by my amazing co host, Joy West Phalo. And we are here to remind you, right, that there is hope at the end of the tunnel. So we interview real moms, we share their stories, and we give you real hope. So we have an amazing guest on tonight. Joy, I'm going to pass it to you and then we'll let her introduce herself.
Yes. I just got to say, I had to remind myself today that there is always hope at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes you have to just pause and say, you know what? There is hope at the end of the tunnel, just walking through the process. So, Miss Pamela, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Let everyone know whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so my name's Pamela Topjian, and thank you guys for having me on. I am honored to be a part of all of this. I think the work you're doing is so important because so many of us have similar situations that we've been through, and people need to know that they're not alone and, that there is hope at the end of the tunnel, right? So my story is that I'm a survivor of childhood trauma, which led to trauma in adulthood, two abusive marriages. I was a teen mother. I am a former nurse turned hypnotherapist. Now I'm a full-time pet sitter. And yeah, I'm also an author. I wrote a book about the whole experience of my childhood trauma. I had a big mental breakdown and the healing from that also, because I mean, that's the reason you guys are doing this too, because people need to know that healing is possible after these major things they go through. So we can delve into any or all of that you want, whatever whatever way we want to go is totally fine by me. I'm an open book.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for your transparency, because I know a lot of times when we deal with those things and we're unpacking the trauma, right? We're unpacking the hard things. It can be hard. I know, at least for me, kind of digging up those old wounds, even though it's like, okay, I'm healed from it, I'm removed from it, but you're talking about it, right? And you're
Yeah.
talking about it because we know that our the things that we go through, it's not just for us. It can absolutely bring hope to someone else. So, can you share with us, maybe take us back to one of the hardest moments in your journey? And for me, it sounds like you shared a lot already. So, maybe if you can maybe pinpoint, like, what was that hardest moment in your journey like? And what did it look like for you as a mother during that time?
Yeah, so the hardest part really, I think I'm gonna go to having a major mental breakdown to where I was suicidal, highly anxious, could barely function. And that as a mother, so my children were already adults at that time, because this is my second abusive marriage. I had one toxic marriage for 15 years where my kids were younger, of course, divorced, and I used the analogy or whatever you call it of, I jumped out of the frying pan and right into the fire. I went to even a worse toxic relationship from there. Stayed in that marriage for 8 years and finally had enough when he had knocked me unconscious on the floor of the closet. And when I got up, I had to call the police to get out because he wouldn't let me leave. And that was the last I saw him. And of course, then went through the divorce and everything. But then I had moved right away, been through that big traumatic experience. And then I had this major mental breakdown and it was shocking to me. I was like, what is what, I thought everything will be great now. I left that situation. I'm on my own. Yay, all's going to be great. And it just spiraled downward and downward and downward, and so that was a big shock to me. And, as far as the kids, so even though they were adults, like I said, I was suicidal. And a lot of people, when they're feeling that way, when they're that low, it's the children that keep them from doing that, right? But for me, it was more of my mother because I lost my sister when I was 14 and she was 18. So my mother had already lost one of her children, and I didn't want her to go through that again. At that point, I felt like my kids would be better off without me, which is, terrible to think. But like I said, they were adults off on their own, and here their mom was breaking down and, off in another part of the country. And I thought, oh, I thought that was kind of a burden for them just to know mom's not doing well. And I couldn't explain it because I didn't really get what was going on with me at that point. So that was really the roughest part of my journey. Yeah.
Wow. I must say you don't look like what you've been through.
I
And I'm
know.
just trying to digest all of that because Juanita and I both were teen moms
Yeah.
and getting married and all of that and dealing with that. So how old were you when you had your first as a teen mom?
Yeah, I was 17 when I had him.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't marry his father. His father wasn't in the picture. So it was 5 years later that I did get married and had another daughter.
So how did you deal with that domestic violence being a teen mom and trying to navigate everything?
So I did not experience domestic violence as a teen mom. It
Okay.
wasn't until I was much older. So the first marriage was good for about 5 years, which means my firstborn was already in his young teens.
Okay.
And that's when my husband, my first husband, so he was emotionally and verbally abusive and very controlling. So he wasn't physically abusive, and so the children only saw this like later on. Like he would be very demeaning towards me and, like I said, very controlling. And I sort of kept it separate from my motherhood, my life with my children. He had worked second shift, so he was away, like they came home from school and he was gone for dinner and stuff. So that was great. And but when he was around, I felt like I couldn't be myself because everything was criticized, everything was, knocked down and whatever. So only when I noticed that he was starting to criticize me or question me or just, be verbally abusive in front of the children, that's when I knew that is not good. That can't stay like this, can't stay like this. And I had to like avoid him like on his days off, or because he was on in like the swing shift on second shift, but he had like rotating days. So it wasn't just the weekends he was off, it was like 2 days a week, whatever. And so I would really, on those days that he was home, I just had to totally avoid him and try not to be in the same room as him at the same time because I didn't want the children to see the way he treated me.
Wow. So it sounds like maybe you almost like lost your voice,
Oh
right?
gosh.
Your voice in that season of life. So how did you get it back? How did you get your voice back?
So, I never had a voice. I mean, not until recently. So you're saying it sounds like I lost my voice during that. So going back to the childhood trauma, I grew up in poverty without a father, and my mother was working all the time and never around. And I had two older sisters, and they were never around. So I was alone a lot of the time, and I was hungry most of the time. And we moved a lot, and sometimes we were evicted. So I never felt like I had anything to say or that anybody cared about how I felt or anything. I didn't have my own voice as a kid growing up. And that's part of how I got into these relationships, into these toxic marriages, because I didn't know who I was. I didn't have any, voice. And so it's not that I lost it at that point. I never had it, and I didn't know what it was like to even have a voice. So and then getting into that second marriage right away didn't help anything. So I found the voice, found my voice, found myself. After that mental breakdown, I ended up moving far away. I got some therapy. So it wasn't until then, it wasn't until after that mental breakdown, after I moved far away, after the therapy, and writing my book, actually. And it doesn't have to be a book. I mean, just writing it down, I think, is so helpful. Even I just started as a journal. I didn't plan on publishing at first. And just getting, connecting those dots and sort of putting the pieces of the puzzle together to realize what happened, how I got to this place that I am, and I was 50 at that point. So I was already, and that's part of the thing too. Part of the reason I like to tell my stories, because women, especially like once you get past 50, it's like they just sort of settle. It's like, this is how it is, whatever, I've been through that, and there's no more hope left a lot of times for women once they get past like middle age, then they feel like, what's left now? Well, I might as well just wait it out or whatever, but it doesn't have to be that way. So just finding my voice was through the therapy, through writing everything out. That was huge. And getting to know myself, giving myself that space to know myself. Yeah.
I like what you said when you said about being 50 or being at a certain age and women think that that's it. Because a lot
Yeah.
of women, I've heard women verbalize that, well, I'm old now. And they think once they become a certain age that there's no more love, that they'll never find love or
Mhm.
find, anything. And that's
Yeah.
important by you recognizing that you needed to find your voice and you needed the healing. I think that's one of the biggest things a lot of people um they don't realize it or they don't vocalize it like I need help
Yeah.
and or they're embarrassed or something like that. So what does that look like? At what point did you, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but at what point did you just say, you know what? I know I got to get help for my kids. And how did you show up for your kids in that same process as you were healing?
Yeah, so I knew that I needed help when so I said that I made a big move. I was in that mental breakdown. I made a big move sort of as a last ditch effort and just moved far away, and I was on a bus alone with a one-way ticket at age 50. So it's kind of funny to think back now. But but yeah, so I think that, you know, um I lost my train of thought now. So I moved away and so what was the question again? I'm sorry. Lost my train of thought when I started laughing about the bus.
No, it's okay. I get my thing. At what point did you realize that you need
Oh yeah.
to heal? And then how did you show up during your healing process as a
Yeah.
mother?
Yeah. So when I had moved, I thought this is going to fix it because I was so fearful where I was. And I thought that, he might find me, even though he didn't know where I lived. So I was fearful and I thought that that was the reason. And I thought this move is going to fix everything. And when it didn't, just like I thought when I divorced, it was going to fix everything. But when I moved and I still was feeling even more depressed, I was still suicidal, I was still highly anxious, highly fearful of everything, and I couldn't sleep, and I knew that that was making everything worse even. So it's like, okay, this didn't work. I'm even getting worse. I really need help because if I have to live like this, I felt like if I'm going to stay in this deep, dark hole, I cannot go on with my life the way that is. So I knew that that was, I was kind of losing my mind, but I was lucky enough to have enough sense to know that I'm having these thoughts and that's dangerous. So I went to the doctor, actually, the medical doctor, because I thought I could get like something to help me sleep. I wasn't really thinking of therapy at that time. And so I did get some medication, not to help me sleep, but I got some like antidepressants. And that doctor referred me to a therapist. So, how that, so my kids were already adults, but they were kind of aware of somewhat of what was going on. I didn't want to share too much with them because I didn't want to scare them, but they also were aware enough of, I made this big move, I had divorced, I was, everything was changing with me. And so I kind of, kept in contact with them because I felt like, first of all, they, as adults, young adults, I felt like they were sort of my, I don't want to say my rock, but, they centered me. They made me feel, they were part of me, And so I kind of kept in touch with them, trying not to get too in depth with them and too emotional with them. But I think keeping in touch with them. And then later on, they have said, we could see that you were doing better. And it, or, even at the time, it's like, you're getting better. I can tell you're, I'm so happy for you that you're, reinventing yourself. And, so that was really, really nice. So they were almost, and again, I don't want to say rocks, but I don't want to say friends either, but just keeping in touch with them and keeping it real with them, to a point of, not wanting to scare them or not wanting to talk bad about my daughter, my second child, not wanting to talk bad about her dad to her. But she did say later too that she understood now why you left. It's like once she became an adult and had her own relationships and saw her dad in other relationships, she's like, I get it now, So that was good. Yeah.
So I want to say this, by you moving, that was very good that you realized again, because I recently just made a move
Right.
from Alabama to South Carolina, and
Uh,
it's just my husband and I. And so I sometimes get into a place where it's like it's just us. I don't know anybody, and you can get down and depressed. And I can only imagine having all the other things going on top of not knowing anybody.
yeah.
So, Miss Pam, give yourself a pat on the back for doing what you needed to do for yourself, because I know I was just sitting here thinking, I can just be 100% transparent. We did a rebrand with hope at the end of the tunnel, and just by sitting here listening to your story, I'm thankful that we came together, because your
Yeah.
story is going to help me.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank
you're
you.
welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, everybody needs to know that, that there is hope at the end of the tunnel,
Yeah.
and especially, like I said, so many people, especially at a certain age, but even not, even younger people, they lose that hope. It's so easy to lose that hope and to not see any even shimmer of light at the end of that tunnel. So yeah, people need to know that it's possible. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing, and I know this may be going a little off base, but one thing that I want to commend you for is showing up for yourself, right? But you don't stop being a mother just because you have adult children. So
Yeah.
you making that decision for yourself is going to help your children in the future as well, because now you've given them the example of what it means to choose yourself and to show up for yourself. And that is so
Yeah.
important. Yes. So what did that look like, right, as they were growing up? Because I know you had childhood trauma and you were in these abusive situations where maybe the first one wasn't physical, it was that emotional, mental, which is still abuse. But then
Yeah.
they had to, I'm not sure, you have to tell us that part. Did they have to see some of the physical abuse? And how did you still show up as a mother in that season?
So by the time I was married the second time, my oldest was already an adult and on his own. My youngest was a young teen, and I lived very close. When I divorced that first husband, I stayed close, went to an apartment building probably a mile or two from the house, which was not too far from her school. And so we kind of let her decide where she wanted to go. And, one of my biggest regrets is, I got married quickly. And so she stopped wanting to spend time with me because I think that kids have a sense more so than us sometimes. And she did not like him. And, I'm glad now that she kind of avoided me and avoided us. And it wasn't a good situation for her to see. So nobody saw that. that physical abuse or the abuse that I got in the second marriage. Nobody saw that. Um, so yeah, so as far as my kids, I think, at that time I wasn't really very much in close contact with them because I was starting to get even more down on myself and losing any shred of self-confidence that I had. So in the first marriage, so I was a high school dropout when I became pregnant. And so, and I got my GED, but near the end of that first marriage, I went back to school for nursing, and that's what kind of helped me. You asked about finding my voice. So that's not when I found my voice, but that is kind of when I sort of stood up for myself and did something just for me, and knowing that it would be something that would get me out of there where I could take care of myself, without needing him. Because one of the things in that first marriage that he really stressed about always was his money, his money, his money, and even though it was, I was working off and on part-time jobs here and there and stuff. Um, but he was very sort of, he was controlling, but he was also, um, I guess, stingy, I guess. So like if I bought juice for the kids, like fruit juice, he'd be like, you could have bought Kool-Aid for 25 cents, and he'd be mad at me for buying juice instead of Kool-Aid. So just little things like that, and I just was being yelled at. So so yeah, I went to nursing school in that first marriage, and as soon as I was graduating, it's like I divorced him and I took my state board. So it was like all at that same year, everything changed. But yeah, again, I don't know if I answered your question or not. I guess I go off on these tangents a little bit.
Oh, and you know what? I think you did bring clarity to what that season was like because a lot of the times, and I can talk about, I've been in, a situation, domestic violence situation. So my son, he actually had to see some of
Yeah,
those. So it's like it's an experience for your children as well.
yeah,
Um, and so that's what the question, like, how did you still show up as a mother in that
yeah,
season? Because that's tough, right? You have to basically you're in survival mode. So how
yeah.
you still show up for someone else.
Yeah, so in that first marriage when the kids were at home, like I said, I sort of avoided being in the same space that my husband was in when the kids were home. And I mean, that's too bad, but that's how I survived, and that's how I tried to keep them from seeing it. But, also, like I said, my daughter later on had mentioned, "Oh, now I know. Now I see it. Now I know why you left." Yeah. Yeah, so to me, I mean, even though we had a time there where she wasn't real happy with me, and and I understand it, and I'm glad actually she wasn't around for that second marriage. But even though there's that, I'm glad that later on in life she recognized and saw that I wasn't going to stay for that, like as a woman, because I feel like I didn't have any good example growing up of any kind of good couple, good marriage or relationship at all. And so I was glad that, she maybe did in the beginning when she was little, but then later on she realizes that that wasn't something that was healthy. So yeah, I think it's so important to show that to our, I was going to say our girls, but the boys too, for sure, show that to our children. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm gonna pass it back to Joy. But I think that it is, very important that we do show that, right? So that is a way that you showed up for them in that season, even if it felt like distant, you still
Hmm.
showed up in a positive way that she can now look back and
Yeah.
say, thank you. And she got to see things for herself as well.
Yeah.
Without
Yeah.
having to speak negatively or down talk him. Kids have
Right.
their own eyes, their own ears, they can see for themselves.
Yeah.
As soon as I start talking, the thing popped up. You're on mute. Okay. What are some practical tools or small habits that helped you feel whole again, even in broken seasons?
Yeah. So meditating is huge. Having, I think, writing everything down. keeping a journal, that helps you to understand yourself better, helps you to understand your life, your situation, and, understand what's happening. And even if you don't at the time and you're confused and you don't know what to write down, I think, just writing something little and making that a habit, because eventually some of those writings will surprise you, and they will bring clarity to you. So I think that that is huge. That's one of the best things, meditating and journaling, so that's two habits, but, I think those have been very helpful and kept me sane, and helped me to grow actually, from where I was to who I am today.
Absolutely. And I love like journaling. That's definitely been my thing. And I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure for Joy as well. You mentioned you're an author, so we're both
Yeah.
authors as well.
Oh,
So, like
nice.
I've those seasons where like I'm down, I can just write.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's if I can't talk to anybody about it, I can go and I can journal it out. So what's one thing that you maybe wish someone had said to you, because you have mentioned that you didn't have those examples. So now that
Yeah.
you've gone through your seasons, you've gone through your healing, what is something that you wish someone would have said to you back then?
Yeah. So, people sometimes, so I had asked my mother later, why didn't you say something to me? And she was like, would you have listened? And it's like, that's not the point, because when I think back of people who had did say to me, you'll be okay. You're going to come out of this. Everything will be fine. And it sounds kind of, like you're putting them off a little bit, but actually once you get to a place that you are, mostly healed, I don't know that we ever fully heal from trauma, but once you get to a place that you are doing well in your life and in yourself, it's good to know that there were those people that, that cared enough to let you know I know you and I know you're going to be okay. It's just really nice to look back and think that they understood and they saw you for what you could become. So I wish that more people would have maybe warned me about that second marriage or said, "Hey, what the heck are you doing?" Um, I think that people saw it, but they just were like, just sort of stood back and kind of, just didn't know what to say or didn't think it was their place or something. But I think it's important to tell people, especially your loved ones and people you're close to and you care about, let them know, even if they don't listen to you, even if they're mad at you for a little bit. I think that's so important. I know it would have meant something to me if people did. And I want to mention too, we're talking about what people say to you having an impact. So when my oldest sister was killed in the car accident, we were at the hospital. My mother's friend drove us, and I was sitting in the waiting room. My mom was off, I don't know where, and my mom's friend said to me, and I was just turning 14, so it was 2 days before my 14th birthday. My mother's friend pointed right at me and said, "Don't you cry. Don't you cry. You be strong for your mother." And, that's the opposite of like, that was the worst thing that anybody could have said to me. And it had such an impact on me that even to this day, I have trouble like expressing emotions, or crying, I should say, I have trouble like even when I feel like crying, like right away, it's just like an automatic response to just stop it. And I know that that's from that. So, yeah. So words are important.
Yes, words are very powerful.
Hmm.
You have to be careful what you say.
Right.
So, Miss Pam, today, what does hope at the end of the tunnel mean to you, and how are you living that out?
So hope at the end of the tunnel means to me that there is light, even if it's far away, to keep your eye on that light. And you will, as long as you focus on that, you will see it grow. You will see it get closer. And before you know it, it'll be all around you and you'll be in the light. I know that sounds a little cliche, but my gosh, it's so true, you know? So that's what it means, holding on to that hope, looking down that tunnel and seeing even just a little tiny pinprick of light down there. Keep focused on it and it will grow. So how I live that today, so I do not there's this saying, I guess it is, if it's not a heck yeah, it has to be a heck no. And that's how I live my life. If I'm not totally for something, if I don't want to do it, if I'm not in love with the idea, forget it. I'm not going to do it. And that goes for big things as well as even, do I want to go to this movie with this friend? No, I'm not gonna go because if I don't want to see the movie, or if I'm not feeling good to go out or whatever, whereas before I would have done something just to do it with them, for them. And I'm looking out for myself. And I think that's what it means when you're surrounded by that light that was at the end of the tunnel and now you're in it, you are just hyper aware of anything that shadows that, So that's how I live that today. I don't let those shadows creep in at all, It's self-care, really.
Yes, absolutely. You definitely are. When I think about, and Joy, you mentioned this earlier, I think that you define, right, what hope at the end of the tunnel looks like.
Thank you.
You
Thank
really
you.
do. And the way that you just broke that down, I know for me, that was inspiring for me. Creating boundaries. When you're in the light, those boundaries become firm. You know how to
Yes.
speak up for yourself a little bit
Yes.
more. Your yes is your yes, your no is your no, and you stand firm in that. So
Yes.
thank you so much for sharing and your wisdom that you've poured out. We do want to make sure that our listeners can connect with you on social media. I know you have some amazing things going on. So if you can, just let us know how we can connect with you on social
Yeah.
media.
Thank you. So I have on Instagram, it's innerjourney.pamelatopjian. And really, and YouTube is my name, Pamela Topjian. So I keep my Facebook private. I don't have any kind of public Facebook page or anything, and I'm not on TikTok and anything like that. So yeah, basically the YouTube channel or my Instagram. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Go ahead, Joy. I saw you come off mute.
I just want to say thank you so much for accepting the invite. I didn't tell y'all I met Miss Pam off another podcast group.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
when you share your introduction, I said, you know what? Let me see if she would like to be a guest, not even knowing what all you had inside of you, not knowing that you have gone through so much. That's just the power of social media.
yeah,
And I literally dropped the flyer. She contacted me, and here we are today. So thank
yeah.
you for accepting and being our guest. And I
Thank you
know that
so
you
much.
will. You're welcome. I know that your story will definitely give some ladies hope.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking this time out. Definitely, in the future, we would love to have you back on. I know that there's so much that we didn't even get to cover tonight. So I know we for sure have to get you back on. But as always, listeners, when you check out this episode, make sure that you subscribe, of course, like, share it, and then leave us a comment, right? Leave us some feedback. What is one takeaway that you had after listening to this episode? And then make sure you stay tuned. We have some another amazing episodes to come. Thank you so much, Miss Pamela. Until next time,
Thank you.
take care.